We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 25th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, France says it will recognise the state of Palestine. We'll look at the fallout and the current situation in Gaza. Then, fighter jets, rocket launchers and closed borders. Tensions between Thailand and Cambodia explode into deadly clashes. Can diplomacy pull this back from the brink? We'll have a roundup of the papers from Nairobi and hear how Volodymyr Zelensky may be putting Ukrainian democracy in jeopardy. Now, tariffs are rising, trade tensions are high, and yet the global economy is holding firm. We'll ask what's behind this surprising resilience and how long it can last. And to get more specific on that, Vicky Price joins us to give us the latest news from the markets. But there is still plenty of crazy stuff out there, as Andrew Muller will illustrate.
We learned this week that there is a limit to the insouciance, the sang-froid and general laissez-couler of French President Emmanuel Macron.
And we'll bring the curtain down with news of the latest West End openings. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The US has lifted sanctions on Myanmar after the junta praised Trump in a move Human Rights Watch calls a dangerous shift in policy. The UK has pledged absolute commitment to Australia as the AUKUS submarine pact strengthens Indo-Pacific defence ties. And wrestling legend Hulk Hogan has died at 71 after a career that blended superstardom, scandal and Trump-era politics. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, France will recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September, a diplomatic shift that's already drawn sharp criticism from Israel and the US. President Emmanuel Macron says the move is aimed at reviving the two-state solution and building momentum for peace. Israel's government has called it a reward for terror, while Washington says it plays into Hamas propaganda. And in Gaza, ceasefire talks now face new delays after Israel recalled its delegation following a revised proposal from Hamas. Well, I'm joined now from Dubai by Greg Karlstrom, who's Middle East correspondent and author of How Long Will Israel Survive? The Threat from Within. Greg, thanks for coming on the show today. What's behind Macron's decision to recognise Palestine now, and could it have real diplomatic weight, or is it merely symbolic?
I think it's more the latter. The announcement of this forthcoming recognition comes a few days ahead of a conference that France has organized along with Saudi Arabia on trying to sort of revive the two-state solution and come up with a concrete plan for getting to a Palestinian state and the end of the conflict. That conference was supposed to be held in New York last month, but it was postponed because of the war in Iran, so it's been rescheduled for the end of July. And obviously, it's a sign of frustration on the part of European governments, Arab governments, many governments, with the direction of politics in Israel under this right-wing government that doesn't even want to talk about Palestinian statehood. So you can see it as a sign of how badly Israel's international standing has fallen over the past 2 years. But at the same time, I don't think it makes much difference on the ground. You already have 100 plus countries that recognize a Palestinian state, but that recognition hasn't done anything to help bring that state to creation. And I don't think France joining the group will make much of a difference.
And what's been the Israeli and US response?
Anger on both sides. I mean, the Israeli reaction, of course, is predictable. You've had a lot of right-wing politicians, and not just right-wing ones, denouncing this, but also the reaction from the United States, the Trump administration condemning France for this decision. Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador in Israel, tweeting earlier this morning that, perhaps if France can recognize a Palestinian state, then the UK can take over France or something like that, if we can just change borders unilaterally. So a very angry reaction from the US as well.
Could this isolate France diplomatically?
Well, I think it will strain their relations with America a bit for a moment, but I'm not sure in the long run how much difference it's going to make in terms of their relationship with the US. And I think in terms of relations with Israel, this isn't the biggest irritant in the bilateral relationship. I think for France and for so many other countries around the world right now, the issue that they have with Israel is they want the war in Gaza to end. They want the ceasefire. They've been pushing for one for many, many months. So those relationships are already quite strained because of what Israel is doing in Gaza.
Well, let's have a look at Gaza, because Israel's pulled its delegation from the talks in Qatar, as has the US. They say to consider a new proposal from Hamas. So what is in that proposal, and why did the other negotiators leave?
I think there are two issues here. There's the sort of detail-focused issue that the negotiators have been working on in Qatar and also in Italy yesterday, where Steve Witkoff, America's Middle East envoy, met with Israeli and Qatari officials. And they are trying to negotiate the extent of Israel's withdrawal from Gaza during the initial phase of the ceasefire, which is meant to last for 60 days. Hamas wants Israel to pull out of larger chunks of territory in Gaza. And so they've been going back and forth, offering and counter-offering maps of how far Israel would pull out. That's the main issue in these negotiations. And then there are some ancillary issues to do with the release of Palestinian prisoners and other things as well. So all of that needs to get worked out in negotiations. But above all of that, you have the bigger question of, is this just another time-limited truce that is meant to facilitate the release of some Israeli hostages, and then the Israeli government will resume the war in 2 months' time? Or is this really going to be the deal that ends the war for good? And so far, it's not clear that the Israeli government is prepared to end the war, and it's also not clear that the Trump administration is prepared to apply the sort of pressure on Israel that it would need to push Prime Minister Netanyahu into a permanent ceasefire.
Meanwhile, of course, conditions in Gaza remain absolutely dire. How much are humanitarian issues shaping the pressure on both sides?
Well, it should be shaping the pressure. I think within the Israeli military, there is some recognition now that conditions, as you say, really are dire, that people are dying of starvation in Gaza, and that could accelerate quite quickly. The way hunger tends to work is that you have a trickle of deaths in the beginning, and numbers don't look maybe that horrifying, but then people start to die quite quickly afterwards. And so humanitarian groups are warning that Gaza may be at that point where we've seen perhaps a few dozen people die of starvation already. Those numbers could grow significantly in the coming days. So there's obviously a need to get more aid in, both in northern Gaza, where the UN is struggling to do aid distribution, and in the south, where this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is doing a woefully inadequate job handing out aid. There's a need to get more aid in, but as long as the war is ongoing, as long as Gaza is still an active war zone, it's very hard to distribute that aid, for people to come and collect that aid. Even if you're getting more across the border, that doesn't necessarily mean it's getting people who need it.
Yeah. So finally, on the ground, with these ongoing strikes and gunfire, with people being attacked even as they go for aid, what is the current picture and how is that affecting negotiations?
People are being pushed into ever smaller areas in Gaza. We saw earlier this week Israeli troops going into Deir al-Balah, which is a city in the central part of Gaza that by and large had been spared heavy fighting over the past few years. That's for the first time Israeli tanks had entered that city. So you have then another wave of displacement, people who had fled there, who thought it was relatively safe, now being pushed out and forced to find somewhere else to go. So that the space available for Gazans to live on keeps getting smaller. And then, as you say, there's the question of people being attacked even as they are trying to collect aid. We're hearing these weekly, if not daily, reports of people being shot or shelled or otherwise killed by Israeli troops. And that is an inevitable consequence of the way Israel has decided that aid distribution should work in Gaza, because you now only have a handful of distribution sites run by this foundation. That is going to lead to very large crowds forming every morning, desperate people trying to get into the distribution hubs and pick up a scarce parcel of food. And when you have big crowds forming in what is still a very chaotic war zone, unfortunately, you are going to end up with these kinds of horrific incidents day after day.
Greg, thank you very much indeed. That's Middle East correspondent and author Greg Karlstrom there. And this is The Globalist. It's 13:11 in Bangkok, 7:11 here in London. Tension between Thailand and neighbouring Cambodia continues to escalate. At least 11 Thai civilians and a soldier have been killed in clashes along the frontier. Both sides accuse the other of firing first, but the response has been severe. Thailand has carried out airstrikes using F-16s, while Cambodia has reportedly launched BM-21 rockets. Bangkok has sealed all land border crossings and evacuated 40,000 civilians. Phnom Penh has downgraded diplomatic ties and condemned what it calls brutal military aggression. With fighting spreading across at least 6 points on the frontier and no sign of either side backing down, peace talks remain off the table. Well, in Bangkok, I'm joined by James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor. James, thanks for coming back on the show. We spoke to you yesterday. So how has the situation advanced since then?
Well, I should say that, we're getting most of our information from the Thai side. I am based in Bangkok. We do have a direct kind of channel with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and there's a lot of international journalists here. So I guess there's a lot of the news is coming from the Thai side, and the Cambodians are actually not putting out much information whatsoever. So in terms of today, the Thai army, have confirmed that fighting is continuing across the border, but it doesn't sound like it's anywhere near what the devastation that we saw yesterday. As you mentioned, Thailand launched F-16 several times to bomb Cambodia, and there was these kind of really distressing scenes of a 7-Eleven convenience store at a petrol station that had been hit by a Cambodian rocket. So that was yesterday, and most of the fatalities, as you mentioned, were yesterday. The death count on the Thai side is up to 14 now. A local Cambodian provincial leader has confirmed 1 death on the Cambodian side, but I suspect that will be much higher. But today the focus has been on kind of clearing what the Thai army are calling a red zone around the border and evacuating Thai civilians at least 20 kilometers back from the Cambodian border. That number now is up to 100,000 people. So there are 100,000 people now living, in temporary accommodation and tents. But yes, it's still ongoing, but there's been no kind of escalation from the fighting we saw yesterday.
And with all those evacuations and diplomatic ties downgraded, what's the immediate impact on livelihoods and regional stability?
Well, livelihoods on the border will have been completely disrupted. We saw some horrible scenes yesterday of kids being killed in this, and there are families obviously fleeing for their lives. But then, when you look at the capital and everywhere else in Thailand, Thailand's quite a big country. I was out and about in Bangkok early this morning. I was on the BTS SkyTrain going into the centre for meetings, and life is going on as normal. I imagine everybody on public transport is following the news very closely on their phones, but it doesn't feel like a country that's gearing up to go to war. I mean, you don't see any soldiers on the streets yet. It does feel like something that's happening quite a way away. And the acting Prime Minister, Puntam Wichayachai, came out yesterday after a 2.5-hour meeting of the National Security Council, and his wording suggested they want to keep a lid on this and de-escalate. He said, Thailand is not yet declaring war on Cambodia, and he was keen to call this not a war but a border skirmish. So at the moment, the words that are being used on the Thai side are definitely trying to keep a lid on this. But it's worth pointing out that civilian control by any political party of anything that happens on the border, especially a contested border like this, is very light, and it's always handed over or taken over by the army. And given the political instability in Thailand right now, that the army is certainly running the show. So, I mean, if you want to look at what's going to happen and how this is going to reach any kind of de-escalation, it will be, for the army to probably be, front and centre.
And what role can ASEAN or other international bodies realistically play? What needs to happen to open the door to talks?
Well, all of these institutions in big countries and allies have been coming out to call for a de-escalation and maximum restraint. We've heard from the US, we've heard from Antonio Guterres from the UN, we've heard from Australia, the EU, China. And there's actually going to be an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council later today. The Cambodians did appeal to the UN for that. I think Pakistan is actually in the rotating chair. And as it turns out, the Thai Foreign Minister, Maris Sangiampong, was actually in New York at the time addressing the Security Council. So he's going to be there for that. So let's hope that forum can provide a chance for the two sides to actually talk rather than to continue this bickering. But, I mean, you could either see today's I guess the fact that it's the fighting has slowed down a bit as the first signs of de-escalation, or you could just see this as another day in what's probably going to be another border skirmish that will go on for months and months until both sides finally agree to kind of withdraw their troops.
And James, should this continue spiralling, is there a risk of regional contagion? And how would neighbouring countries line up? And crucially, who would China support?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing here is, I mean, both countries, they're neighbours, and they're both part of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And one of the core principles of ASEAN is non-interference in each other's business. This whole thing flared up because the Cambodian kind of patriarch Hun Sen essentially interfered in Thai domestic politics by leaking that call he had with the suspended Prime Minister, Paetong Shinawatra. So that will have got a lot of noses out of joint around the region. But it's not one of those conflicts that's going to bring in other countries. That's not what goes on in this region. And China doesn't have, a history of running into foreign wars and getting involved in disputes between neighbours. It will be interested in peace and kind of trying to leverage its influence in here, but it's not going to be one of those, I call it a border skirmish that's going to bring in other nations, but it will take other nations and influential allies and partners like China, like the US, like the ASEAN chair Anwar Ibrahim to bring the sides together. And let's hope the conversations in New York later today can be the first step towards a peaceful outcome.
James, thank you very much indeed. That's James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor, speaking to us from Bangkok. Still to come on the programme.
By straying into authoritarianism, Zelensky has shot himself in the foot.
We'll hear about democracy and defence under threat in Ukraine. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates. each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. And joining us down the line from Kenya is Navina Kaur, Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. Good morning to you, Navina.
Good morning, Georgina.
So we're looking at US sanctions, possible US sanctions on South Africa. Now, this is interesting because it's already been signed, I think, by Congress. It's not set in stone yet. But why does the US want to sanction South Africa?
Yes, this is quite extraordinary news, I have to say, that's coming out of Congress. The US House Foreign Affairs Committee voted to send a bill that would see sanctions being passed to the House of Representatives. I mean, I think if this is supposed to become law, the House of Representatives will have to vote on it, and then the Senate will have to vote on it. So I think we'll have to see how it goes. But what this bill that was introduced in April is saying that South Africa made a choice to abandon America and its allies and side with communists and terrorists. The bill accuses South Africa of undermining US interests in the region by having close ties to Russia and China because it trades with these countries, but also there's a sort of political alliance. It also accuses South Africa of backing Hamas, something that South Africa has denied. And I think the root cause of this is South Africa's support for the Palestinian cause and filing a case at the International Court of Justice 2 years ago.
And of course, if we look at the 6 Democrats who voted for the bill within the Foreign Affairs Committee, they are known to be strong Israel supporters. So there does seem to be quite a strong Israeli lobby behind this.
Yes, I think the South African government is trying to see what comes of it. So far, the Foreign Ministry and the spokesperson for President Ramaphosa have declined to comment. Let's remember there are various issues that the South Africans are currently addressing with the American government. One is tariffs. The other one is the issue of granting asylum to white South Africans who are claiming to be persecuted, a perception that is shared by the US government. So at this stage, the South African government, I think, is trying to sort of maneuver all of these issues and avoid being pulled into a discussion about the veracity of the accusations that are being made in this bill.
Yeah. Now, there is a really inspirational piece in the East African. It's written by Abdul Muhammad, who's a former senior official of the African Union and United Nations. And it's a kind of cri de coeur. He says, he's talking about Africa. We once won our freedom by believing in ourselves. We must now win our future by doing the same. And the whole piece is framed around, this New Yorker, this Ugandan New Yorker, if you like, Zoran Mamdani, who, of course, won the Democratic primary race for mayor of New York. And he is in Uganda.
Yes, he is in Uganda. And I have to say, I know there's a bit of a hype in the United States on the East Coast, but there's definitely a hype on the East Coast of Africa. The hype is real. I think a lot of people here, commentators, but also just young East Africans, are feeling quite inspired by this guy who is their age, who is communicating the way they communicate on Instagram, on X, who talks about the things that actually also matter to people here: education, childcare, healthcare, sort of the bread and butter issues that a lot of people feel politicians and leaders here are not paying enough, attention to. And the way he is seen, the same way he's basically seen as an antidote to kind of the Trump and Republican government in Washington, I think he is actually seen as an antidote to, leaders like Museveni and Ruto and leaders in Tanzania. So I think there's a lot of excitement about the fact that he has come to Uganda. Rumor has it that he's celebrating his wedding here, and he'll be here for 6 weeks. So I'm also heading to Uganda tomorrow, actually, so I'm hoping to bump into him. If I bump into him, I'll try to put him on air.
Absolutely. We're fascinated by him. And just this whole idea that he's sort of really behind this movement to return Africans to democracy rather than a kleptocracy, which a great deal of the continent is in the grip of. Let's move on now and have a look at the former head of the Central African football body, jailed for war crimes.
Yes, I mean, this is a trial that has been ongoing for a really, really long time. We are talking about human rights abuses and crimes against humanity that happened in 2013, 2014 in the Central African Republic. And Patrice Edouard Nguesona was found guilty of committing 28 war crimes and crimes against humanity by judges at the International Criminal Court. I think it's a very important, I don't want to call it success, but trial at the International Criminal Court that often is accused of not being very effective. The judges gave their verdict after a trial that lasted almost 4 years, involving more than 170 witnesses and 20,000 items of evidence. And he has been sentenced to 12 years. The other person has been sentenced to 15 years.
That's extraordinary. And how do people feel about this justice finally being served?
I think the Central African Republic has come a long way since these crimes that happened in 2013, 2014. Back then, he was accused of leading fighters into the capital, Bangui, and slaughtering primarily Muslim civilians. But there has been, the political situation in a way has calmed down. I think there has been a bit of development, and I think people are welcoming these judgments because they're part of a sort of a development of a movement of looking forward by closing these chapters that happened in the past.
And finally, let's have a look at news of one of my former employers, actually. South Africa's antitrust regulators conditionally approved the $2 billion acquisition of the Pan-African broadcaster MultiChoice by France's Canal+. Tell us more.
Yes, so this is going to be the biggest pay TV and streaming business in Africa. The France Canal Plus is very much interested in pushing into this market. There's similar deals being made in other parts of the country, in other parts of the continent, but I think we're looking towards 50 million subscribers. That's what Canal Plus has announced, and a decent amount of investment being made to create more local content and cover more local sports. And I think it goes to shows the development that we have touched on in the past, that the sort of media market here, the entertainment market and the sports market is growing, given how young the audience is, how keen the audience is on sports on the continent, but also on kind of dedicated content that has been produced for the local market. And that's, I think, what we're going to see as part of this merger.
Navina, thank you very much indeed. That's Navina Couture, Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. Have fun in Kampala, Navina. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The US has lifted sanctions on Myanmar military allies just weeks after the junta praised Trump. Rights groups warn of a troubling policy shift amid rare earth competition with China. The UK has vowed absolute commitment to Australia as the AUKUS submarine treaty deepens defence ties. A new pact to underpin security in the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic with £20 billion worth of British exports is expected. And wrestling icon Hulk Hogan has died at 71. The WWE star helped turn pro wrestling into a global entertainment juggernaut. Known for his Trump support and Let Trump Mania Rule rally cry, Hogan leaves a polarising legacy. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look behind the headlines. Here's Monocle's Julia Lassica on Ukrainian democracy and defence in the firing line.
By straying into authoritarianism, Zelensky has shot himself in the foot. A brazen show of authoritarianism from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has put the country's democracy and defence in jeopardy. On Tuesday, Zelensky signed a bill to strip Ukraine's anti-corruption watchdogs of their power. The new law targets the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, also known as NABU, and the Specialised Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAP, the two agencies in charge of investigating and prosecuting corruption across Ukrainian society. Zelensky's stated reasoning is to root out Russian agents supposedly embedded in the agencies. But recently, NABU and SAP had started investigating officials in the president's inner circle. Zelensky's move has led to the biggest protests in Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion and puts the country's survival in peril. Allies of the country, wary of criticising it for fear of Russia weaponising any accusations, are beginning to speak up. A statement from US Senators Lindsey Graham and Jeanne Shaheen, both strong supporters of Ukraine, noted that one of the most common arguments to ending aid for Ukraine is potential corruption. They stated that future US investments are dependent on the continued strength of Ukraine's governance structures. There are signs that the once lauded wartime leader might reverse his folly. Regardless, Zelensky's actions have already had a damning effect. The EU paused talks with Ukraine on accession into the bloc. Now the flow of money that is keeping the country's defence industry on target will be even more highly scrutinised. Zelensky, who came to power on a wave of public anti-corruption anger, surely knows that his gamble wasn't worth it.
That was Monocle's Julia Lassica, and for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up to our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Despite months of rising tariffs and deepening trade tensions, the global economy seems to be weathering the storm. Growth remains steady, trade volumes are holding up, and markets have rebounded. So, in this time of great uncertainty, how is this possible? Well, I'm joined now by Tom Fairless, global economics correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. He's recently published a piece entitled "The Global Economy is Powering Through a Historic Increase in Tariffs." Tom, welcome to The Globalist. In your article, you argue that both businesses and households have shown surprising agility in adapting. What strategies are they using to get round these new trade barriers?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I think it's surprised economists how flexible households and businesses globally have been. There was a lot of kind of catastrophizing in April about how we were going back to sort of Great Depression level tariffs. And I suppose the implication was that the economy was going to have a huge dip. And really, it's just continued exactly as before. With, as you were saying, trade volumes are continuing, businesses are continuing to invest, to import and export. I think I think a central element has been that the US households have been very strong and have continued to import, even recently when they were facing already high levels of tariffs. And I think that's partly because households in the US are doing very well, very prosperous. They've seen good wage increases recently, and household net worth is strong because of the stock markets, because of house prices have increased. So I think households are in a very good position. I think businesses, as you were saying, have been flexible and have sort of found ways to. So businesses in China have had record exports by basically rerouting exports to the US through other countries like Mexico and Southeast Asia. And I think some of the Western businesses that I was talking to have really become shock-proof because of the whole experience of COVID. I mean, the last, I suppose, 15 or 20 years in global business have really been just a series of these kind of global shocks. And this is just the latest one. And I think some of the German businesses that I speak to basically just rolled out the playbook that they used in COVID and sort of created these specialist trade teams to look at how they could deal with these tariffs. Mm-hmm. And so I think they've become sort of crisis experts. So one of the strategies, I suppose, was to try and front load and bring in more imports before the the tariff deadline, but trade has continued even after tariffs increased around April. So I think, the economists have been very surprised with the agility of businesses globally.
Talking about front-loading, though, how does that affect short-term indicators, and what risks does that pose going forward?
I suppose there is a risk that you'll get a payback, that the imports were very strong in the first quarter, which we did see, and that in the second and third quarter, there'll be a big drop. To be honest, we haven't really seen that so far. There was the big surge in factory production and in trade in the first quarter, but in the second quarter, it was relatively resilient too. And so some economists are saying, well, maybe there won't be so much for a payback. I mean, it could be that also the price increases haven't been passed on completely, and that businesses have absorbed a bit of them, and because of the inventories, they haven't had to pass them on. And so once they do start passing through those higher prices, then you'll start to see the shock, and consumers will balk at paying these higher prices.
Although you give the example of Italian cheese exporters who have passed these costs on, and it hasn't hurt sales at all.
That's right. Yeah. These cheese producers did do some inventory buildup, and so they managed to protect a bit of reduce the price increases a little bit. But they passed on some of the price increases, and the US consumers just continued to buy. So I think that just shows how resilient the households are, and how much of a strong economy the US has right now.
And Tom, you highlight large-scale government spending as a cushion against trade shocks. How is this fiscal policy translating into real economic resilience?
For a start, it gives a degree of confidence to businesses. You see that in Germany, where the government is doing this kind of historic increase in debt. And it's really the business confidence, and the IFO, this IFO Business Climate Index is rebounding. And it gives a degree of stability that they know that the various contracts will come through over time, and in these infrastructure projects, building projects. And so there'll be more confidence, more money in the economy. And I think in the US, it's more in kind of tax cuts that Trump is pushing through this big budget bill that will lower taxes, and so that should support the economy going forward, and support households' ability to continue buying.
And finally, do you think, as the ECB seems to, that we're witnessing deeper structural changes, such as localised production, that could in fact shift how global trade works completely in the long run?
I think that's true, absolutely. And I think we've seen that for some time now, and that this is just another event that will deepen that. I think that's also a reason that trade hasn't been disrupted in the way it might have been, because businesses have already set themselves up to be more sort of operating on different continents and producing closer to the final consumer. And so they don't have to import and export as much. Certainly German businesses, a lot of the ones I speak to, have already got large US operations, and they're only going to double down on that when they see this risk of a world with higher and higher trade barriers.
So the August the 1st tariff deadline, arbitrary deadline, is looming. Do you think we could see radical change after that?
So I think the uncertainty will clear after the larger trade deals with the EU, maybe with China, go through. Japan was just seems to have done a deal. So I think that should support the economy. But then there is the fact that tariffs will probably increase from this. The base rate is 10% right now. It probably increased to 15, maybe 20% in places like Europe. And so and then businesses, once they know how much they're paying, and once their inventories run thin, they could start to pass through more of those price increases. And so I think most economists think there'll be some kind of dip in the second half of the year.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. That's Tom Fairless, global economics correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. You're with Monocle Radio. It's It's 8:39 in Zurich, 7:39 here in London, and it's time to talk more on trade and economy with Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's economic service. Vicky, really sort of picking off the back of what we were speaking about, the European Central Bank has left interest rates unchanged despite trade war uncertainty. Tell us more about that.
That's interesting, of course, that they've decided not to do anything, but they did say that it was all, quite uncertain looking ahead. And what they really mean is that, what is happening to the economy is something they're watching very carefully. And of course, the uncertainty regarding tariffs, could go either way. So things could improve quite considerably in terms of having a deal, which is still going to leave the EU slightly worse off than it was before in terms of its trade with the US, because tariffs will be higher than what they were being charged before. So if they go for, say, 15%, if you see that before it was about 2.5%, depending on the product you were looking at, although there have been periods of high tariffs on steel and aluminium, which were then dropped during the first term of President Trump. But overall, the EU has benefited from quite low tariffs on its sales to the US. If we get 15% is worse than before, but actually better than the alternative, which could perhaps be 30% or even higher for particular products. So if that deal is reached, then there are lots of discussions that this may indeed be the case, and we may have some resolution coming up pretty soon. Then obviously that will be helpful for the economy. And so that's an upside that they may be looking at, and therefore maybe even inflation might be higher if the economy does better. On the other hand, if the agreement is not particularly beneficial to the EU, even worse than what I've just been discussing with the US, we might end up with more concerns about growth ahead, and therefore perhaps cuts in interest rates will come faster than would otherwise have been the case. I think that's where they are. So the interesting thing for me is just looking at some of the headlines and how the various news outlets are covering it. Some are saying that they didn't cut despite concerns for the economy, and others are saying that actually perhaps they should have cut because whatever happens, everything is slowing down anyway, which is indeed the case in a number of sectors. So that is where I think we are now. In anticipation, the markets are all behaving quite well, actually. They seem to think that there will be a resolution. We've seen that, of course, happening all across the world with the agreements with Japan, and possibly some resolution will be coming forward also on the Chinese front. So we are in this sort of expectant sort of period when you just don't know how we'll end up. But as you've been discussing with the previous contributor, things look a little bit better than perhaps we thought just, even a few weeks ago.
Although perhaps not for British car makers. They say they've been left underwhelmed by the UK-India trade deal that was signed on Thursday. Tell us more.
Yes, I think the concern is that there are possibly different rates of import taxes that will still be applicable to cars, depending on how luxurious, if you like, they are, or what their make is containing. So there are lots of uncertainties still out there, and whether in the end it's going to be positive for the car manufacturing sector or not is a question mark, because what we've seen already in the UK is, of course, quite a substantial drop in car production. In fact, it's gone back to the lowest levels we've seen in decades. And there are worries, of course, about, again, the US and tariffs and so on. But all the trade deals that are being discussed now and are being signed, it's going to take quite some time for them to be effective, of course. Have lots of little details which the car manufacturers in particular are concerned about, which need to be resolved over the next year or so. And so there isn't unanimous sort of joy about that trade agreement, even though obviously it's good news overall for the economy, because what it means is that tariffs are being reduced both sides. Whiskey exporters are jumping up and down with joy because those tariffs are being reduced quite significantly. On the other hand, we're letting in loads of goods coming in from India at quite low rates as well. So real reduction in tariffs both ways. And of course, it could affect particular sectors in different ways. But it's part of the overall ambition of this government, of course, to make up for the fact that we've had to do new deals since Brexit in order to make up for the loss of trade with the EU. And some of those deals, of course, are being pursued as well by the EU. So they're going to have an Indian trade deal as well. So the question mark as to, whether in fact we're ahead of the game or not, or will remain ahead of the game for some time is something we don't really know. But overall, some concerns there, without any doubt, and loads of details to be sorted out. But good news overall.
Vicky, thank you very much indeed. That's Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's Economic Service. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Now it's time for Andrew Muller's regular Friday instalment of What We Learned This Week.
We learned this week that there is a limit to the insouciance, the sang-froid and general laissez-couler of French President Emmanuel Macron. We learned that Macron had instructed his learned friends to file suit for defamation, or perhaps should we say defamation, against conservative American commentator and idiot Candace Owens, who has persistently made a number of interesting assertions about Macron's missus, aka First Lady of France, Brigitte Macron. We learned, and you may want to strap yourselves in for this, that Owen believes that Madame Macron, a mother of three, was in fact born a man, one Jean-Michel Trogneux, and is actually a blood relative of President Macron, who is himself the product of some variety of CIA mind control endeavour. Not really sure Owens is asserting that Macron, though fundamentally human, has merely been programmed by American spooks, or is some sort of wholesale android, being wholly remotely controlled from a bunker at Langley, and to be honest don't care all that much, as this is all obviously quite mad. But we learned that Owens was unrepentant, if incomprehensible.
We are revolting against this. We're revolting against the perverts that run the world. And I want to be very clear here. I count you among them. I think you're sick. I think you're disgusting. And I am fully prepared to take on this battle on behalf of the entire world.
Speaking on behalf of the entire world, this all sounds like tremendous fun. Good luck with it. And we, for one humorous news review, look forward to a court case which will basically write this thing for us for weeks, as well as furnish ample further opportunity to wheel out that somewhat borderline Gallic outrage chorus we recorded whenever and whyever it was.
Non, vraiment, non.
Actually, wasn't there a thing where we thought we'd lost it and made another one?
Non mais ils sont aujourd'hui ces Américains. La statue de liberté, c'est la rachète de culture. C'est le monde à l'envers.
Sticking anyway with the theme of reasons the French might now be regretting their encouragement of the fledgling United States circa the 1770s, and that the Marquis de Lafayette might be turning, if not weeping, in his tomb. We learned that one 34-time convicted felon had figured out who the real criminal is.
It would be President Obama. He started it. And Biden was there with him. And Comey was there, and Clapper, the whole group was there. Brennan, they were all there in a room. Right here, this was the room. This is much more beautiful than it was then, but that's okay.
A reference there to the increasing difficulty many are experiencing in telling the Oval Office apart from one of Saddam Hussein's bathrooms. We learned, yes, that President Donald Trump had concluded that his predecessors had connived in a hideous conspiracy.
This was treason. This was every word you can think of.
What, every word?
Carrot,
chicken,
application, waterfall,
coffee,
apple, coffee mug,
light,
burger,
sky,
light bulbs,
we digress, although we did learn that Trump himself seemed intent on making a bold stab at saying every number he could think of.
We will have reduced drug prices by 1,000%, by 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 700, 600.
Anyway, we learned that, yes, a former president of the United States had attempted to subvert the constitutional order because they didn't like the way an election had gone, and that President Trump was appalled by this notion, the very possibility of anything of the kind ever transpiring having simply never occurred to him.
They tried to steal the election. They tried to obfuscate the election. They did things that nobody's ever even imagined.
But we learned that Trump's point person on this, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, an appointment which continues to make as much sense as naming Vin Diesel Director of National Hair, was somewhat struggling to make the case. Possibly because there isn't one, who can say?
It has to do with an outgoing president taking action to manufacture intelligence, to undermine and usurp the will of the American people in that election, and launch what would be a years-long coup against the incoming President of the United States, Donald Trump.
An outgoing president taking action to undermine and usurp the will of the American people. Sounds dreadful. We learned, or at least found ourselves suspecting, that this flim-flam and, if you will, flummery may have been not altogether unrelated to escalating pressure upon the Trump administration to release possibly scandalous files pertaining to the friendships with powerful personages enjoyed by the late sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, which, we learned, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson was so grimly determined to get to the bottom of that he sent Congress home for the summer so they couldn't ask any questions about it?
There's no purpose for Congress to push an administration to do something that they're already doing.
Are they, though, Mr. Speaker? Are they? For we learned that the figure at the top of said administration appeared to be frantically engaged in tactics which the flint-hearted skeptic may suspect were intended to distract.
This morning, President Donald Trump is escalating his call for the Washington Commanders to change their name back to the Redskins.
We learned that the president was all back in on reviving the inane culture war brouhaha over whether Washington, D.C.'s NFL team should re-embrace a nickname by which no basically well-adjusted adult conversant with the common courtesies, and possibly not even Donald Trump, would dream of addressing an actual Native American. But if he can't get that up to the gate, the Washington Epsteins is right there. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Miller.
Thank you, Andrew. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And finally, let's get a sense of the big weekend releases in Theatreland with Matt Wolfe, theatre critic at the International New York Times, who joins me here in the studio. Matt, we always appreciate you getting up early and coming in here.
Well,
Thank you so much.
It's always a joy to be here, Georgina. Thank you.
Now, two big openings at the National and very female positive, both.
Yes, I mean, this is interesting for a lot of reasons. First of all, the National has 3 auditoria under one roof. All 3 of the plays at the moment are new plays, which is worth saying because it didn't need to be that. And 2 of the 3 plays, which we're going to discuss, both newly opened, are by women. And this has been a big thing in New York recently, not enough female playwrights. So it's good to see women being given their due on Britain's most important theatrical stages. These are also byproducts of the outgoing regime of Rufus Norris, who had been running the National, and Indu Rupasingham starts her regime in the autumn with classics, Hamlet and the Bacchae. So the first of these is Inter Alia, which is a new play by Susie Miller, who people will know from Prima Facie, which was a big deal a couple of years ago with Jodie Comer. This is going to be, I would imagine, a comparable big deal with Rosamund Pike.
Now, she's an Australian.
She's an Australian who has hit the international market with a very particular theme, which is she's a former lawyer herself, and her theme seems to be women who work in the law who come up against the limitations of the very landscape in which they work. So in Prima Facie, we had a barrister who specialized in defending men accused of sexual assault, who was herself then assaulted. And in this play, Rosamund Pike plays brilliantly a judge, Jessica Parks, who holds forth on all sorts of theories and whatever, and she's very dryly objective and commanding, and this all comes crashing down when her teenage son is accused of rape. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden there's a big, you may have a kind of legal defense about things, but what happens when that comes in your own home, in your own kitchen, in your own kind of family life? Some of the writing is a little bald-faced and on the nose, and there are times when you feel like you're being talked at. There's a lot of the play's narration right to the audience, but it's got a very kinetic, volatile production from Justin Martin, who also directed Prima Facie, and Rosamund Pike is brilliant. And might I say, by the way, that she does a mean Tina Turner impression, really? Which I didn't expect, because we see her in a karaoke bar, and all of a sudden she's letting loose with Only the Best, which in Rosamund Pike is one of the best.
That is wonderful. I'm very, very pleased to find out.
She has a whole new calling should she want it.
What else are we seeing there?
Well, the other play, The Estate, other new play by Shansa Hutte, who is herself, interestingly, a doctor who has turned to playwriting. Of course, the great history of doctors turned playwrights is Chekhov. Whether Shansa Hutte will be the next Chekhov, we shall see. But this is not quite as successful as Inter Alia, in my view, but certainly worth seeing, largely for the star performance of Adil Akhtar, who plays the son of a Punjabi immigrant. He's a junior shadow minister who wants the top job. He wants to be leader of the opposition, and he is within a very fractious family, so it's the personal and the political, as in a way as Inter Alia, when you've got the workplace and the domestic. So in a way, they're kind of quite they're sort of kindred spirits. But I think Inter Alia is the more successful of the two.
Mm-hmm. Now, to the Globe.
This was very interesting to me, a huge surprise because it completely wrong-footed my expectation. I love it when that happens. This is a production by Sean Holmes of The Merry Wives of Windsor. Now, this is a Shakespeare comedy that's not done very much, and people don't seem to like it. It's very bourgeois. It's Shakespeare writing about his own community, not about royals, not about fairy sprites. It's about the people he hung out with. And it's full of silly names and pratfalls and people kind of going head over heels. But in this production, instead of celebrating the community in which the play exists, you realize as the show goes on that it's a sort of gentle critique of kind of a cozy domesticity which doesn't allow room for outsiders. Anyone in the play who's French or Welsh, for instance, forget it. They're subject to ridicule. And Falstaff, who we know from the Henry IV plays, who's the main character here, a very different sort of man in this play, is humiliated in the extreme in the last section of the play. I suppose in contemporary parlance you would say he's othered, and it lends a very disquieting air to what should be something quite sort of genteel. And as a result, you sort of look at the play in a new way, and I think that's what you absolutely want from Shakespeare.
I mean, The Guardian accuses it of being xenophobic.
Well, I think one of the things that the production does is expose the quiet xenophobia that lurk beneath placid small-town life, where you think, oh, what a jolly community. Everyone gets along and goes about their business. But in fact, here you've got paranoia, loveless marriages, xenophobia indeed. I began to feel after a while as if I was watching an Alan Ayckbourn play. And that's not what I usually think when I go to Shakespeare. So I would go see it and go along with its changes in mood, which are very powerful.
Mm-hmm. I love, again, The Guardian's picking up on this. The devil who deceived Faust is pronounced, because normally you would say Mephistopheles, but yes. Mephistopheles.
Yes. There are lots of sort of things to kind of chivvy the audience along, because most people, it's not like going to see Twelfth Night, which is coming up there, Romeo and Juliet, which was just there. People arriving at the Globe for kind of a larky night out don't know this play. So you have to kind of get them into the spirit of the piece, and then just to kind of gently turn the knife, as Sean Holmes has done, and kind of expose a just kind of little bit of venality about this sweet-natured group of people. Very clever indeed.
Matt Wolfe, thank you so much. As Mistress quickly says in Act 2, Scene 2 of The Merry Wives, Mary, this is the short and the long of it. That's all we have time for. Thanks to our producers Laura Kramer, Chris Chermak and Tom Webb, our researcher Henry King and our studio manager Lily Austin, with editing assistance from Flynn Simons. And the headlines coming up at the top of the hour. Then there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time on Monday, and I'll be with you tomorrow for Monocle on Saturday, and lots of sharp programming. And then on Sunday, Meet the Writers features the Mexican novelist Guadalupe Nettal. That's all to come. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.